Welcome back. Handbook time has the potential to be the most effective part of your Sparks ministry. It's the greatest time to actually have impact on kids because you're dealing with them one-on-one. So let's start here by describing what your typical handbook time looks like. Terry, we'll start with you.
Well, Jim, our Awana evening starts promptly at 6:45 with our opening ceremony, flag ceremony, and opening prayer. And then from that point, we adjourn the Sparkies to their respective groups, which are set up where we have the kindergartners, boys and girls together with several leaders in one room. And then the first and second grade boys and girls are separated by gender, by grade. So it keeps the groups at a manageable size.
Okay, so you actually have 5 different groups meeting during
Exactly, we have 5 different groups. And with my specific group, I have 3 other leaders besides myself. That gives us 4, and we have 13 or 14 boys. So it averages about 3 to 4 boys per night per leader. And we use the same leaders, same group of boys have the same leader each week. So, you know, we can work on other things besides just they get to know them. It's a relation builder. We start each session with prayer time, and I ask for a show of hands who wants to help me open with prayer, and I get quite a number of hands.
With Sparkies, you probably do get a good number of volunteers.
They want to help out
for anything.
And some of the things they want a prayer for are interesting, but nonetheless, we accommodate them and let them know that they can take their request to God. Then we get into some announcements or some little ice-breaking activities to get the boys settled in and get the leaders settled in and getting ready to go with the scripture memory, which would be the 3rd basic segment of each of our handbook times. And so once the boys have recited their verses, and it's not necessarily the same boy each week be the start for each leader, but who was ever ready, and I try to rotate that myself. Once we get through that period, then if there's any time left, I usually have an extra activity where the boys can earn some Awana shares that can be used later on in the year to be redeemed for some additional incentives, prizes and awards. So it works out real well. I take attendance each night too, to make sure any boys that are absent, and kind of make sure I keep track of my boys and their attendance, and make sure, you know, if anybody's missing, I can contact them or talk to their parents and find out what's been going on.
Right. Okay. Great. So you actually have a set agenda, actually, of things that you do, and your boys know that, and so that kind of, I think, helps keep the discipline because they know what to expect each time.
Exactly. I'll either have an activity for them, or it'll allow me a chance to further define or explain some of the things in their book in a more of a group setting.
Actually use it as a teaching time.
Exactly.
Okay, super. Kim, what does your typical handbook time look like?
Our handbook time is right after large group time, and I usually have things in there prepared and ready to go, but when the kids walk in, I let them choose where they want to sit. I find that works better for discipline and those purposes if they can choose where they want to be. I start with just asking them how their week went, just kind of getting to know them and letting know that I'm glad that they're there and that they're welcome to be here.
So you're actually using it to build relationships with the kids.
Yes, and then after that we kind of go into the section time, and you have some of the kids who want to go first all the time and some kids who want to go last, so we just kind of work around it and try to make sure that each kid has the same amount of time. And I start with one kid one day, and the next week start with another one. That way they all feel like they're valued at some point.
So you kind of mix it up a little bit, but still you have that structure.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Lenine, how about your handbook times?
Well, all of our grades are in different rooms, and we have multiple tables in each room to take care of those kids.
So each of the grades has their own room?
Exactly.
So one grade, one room, okay.
Right. We've collected their books at the beginning of the night so they don't lose them in the shuffle.
Okay.
And then once we get back to handbook time, we pass those out, and while I'm doing that, I'm kind of addressing them and making sure that, you know, they've had a good week and sort of checking in with all of them.
Okay.
And then I always do verses in the same order with the kids from my right-hand side, moving counterclockwise
So you go around the same way each time.
Exactly. So some weeks when there's a kid or two that want to do their verses first, there's sort of a little
They know where to
fight
sit if they want to go
here
first. Okay.
next to me, so they could be the first ones to do their verses. But that way, if kids need a little more time to prepare, they know they should kind of sit over on this end of the table.
Okay. And I understand that, Terry, then, that you actually kind of have assigned seating for the boys?
Not
Or
necessarily.
no, not necessarily.
I think eventually, throughout the 1 year, they'll wind up in the same seat all the time.
They'll
'cause they're working
gravitate
with the
toward a
same-
certain-
Exactly. And what Kim was saying about the questions to kind of break the ice a little bit, we do that kind of during the announcements too. We work with the boys. I'll say something funny, or we'll try to just what's been going on. And that's also a time where I'll take attendance as well, just to make sure we've got all our boys here. And then we do a little bit of cut up just to break the ice a little bit, and to get everybody situated and settled in. So
Okay,
it's a good time.
but I think it's very important that you do have that structured time, and it sounds like you all have a structure of sorts, maybe some looser, some tighter than others, and I think maybe the important thing is that, well, you might want to experiment with things to find out what works best for you, knowing what it is that you want to accomplish in handbook time.
One of the things I did this year is a little bit different than last year, is that, I mean, you experiment, you see what works well, and actually it can carry from week to week and then into the next year. So, what works good, you want to keep in the plan, and if it's something that doesn't work too well, you throw it out and you go to plan B, and you got to understand, Sparkies are pretty flexible, so and so we have to be as well.
Right. Sometimes impatient, like in Lenine's case, but still flexible.
There you are.
And Lenine, you've talked a little bit about balancing between those who are ready with a ton of sections and those who might be struggling a little bit. Terry, how do you handle that?
Jim, our club has a 5-section policy. You can't recite more than 5 sections on any given night. And
So you've
works
chosen
out
to
pretty
actually
well.
set a limit
Right.
on what a child can do.
And you have situations where you have some boys that can rattle them off in about 2 or 3 minutes, and you have some that really struggle. So you have to work and kind of keep things in balance and how you want to balance your time as you're going. And then if for some reason the one that's a little bit slower isn't there that night, then obviously you've got more time on your hands. So, and then you've got other issues
That's
too.
when you need to be prepared with something.
That's when you need to be prepared. You got to be flexible.
Okay.
The other thing is too is where you have a situation where you've got a first-year spark who is in the 2nd grade. So obviously you've got to have a little bit more leniency. So we're not so rigid to say only 5 sections, period. I think given the circumstances, we are a little bit more flexible to allow this child, time permitting, or if it's a case where maybe during game time, if they want to donate or give some of that time to reciting verses, that's totally up between them and the leaders who are willing to listen. So I think flexibility is a lot of it, and having a plan to start with is a good way to go.
Okay. Kim, how about you? You've got the racing rabbits and the slower turtles
Right.
in your group, and how do you work with both of those types of kids?
Well, I try to find out, like, when they first sit down, I find out who has what sections and how many they have, and ask, kind of in a fun way, well, who has a section today? And they'll raise their hands, and I'm like, all right, and you all have 20 sections, right? I'm like, no, and they'll kind of go through what sections they have, and so by that, it's a fun way of figuring out who needs what time and who needs more, and the clubbers who are usually saying 1 section or no sections per week, I'll know that I need to spend a little more time with them and trying to get them motivated to say their sections. Some of the motivational tools that I use are from the Awana catalog, and I'll use those to get them more incentives to do their verses, and then I'll also have a worksheet or some kind of activity for them to do that will help them with their sections. So if the slower kids are having more trouble, I'll take an activity sheet and gear it towards that kid. That way he's coloring a picture something with the verse that he needs for the next week.
I see. Okay, great. Lenine, you actually brought up earlier the challenge that you had in finding that time balance. What are some of the things that you do in order to achieve that?
Well, of course, there's kids that are prepared when they come to club because their parents have worked with them and they have a ton of sections to do, and then there's others that aren't quite as prepared. So you just have to find that delicate balance and keep an eye on your watch and make sure that you're giving each kid the time that they need. And if you do have to limit a kid who's prepared with a ton of sections, that's okay, because you have to make sure that you go over the sections with those that need a little extra help, and make sure that you aren't letting any one kid monopolize your time, whether it's because they have so many verses to say or they need extra help and you need to go through the verses phrase by phrase, or the books of the Bible can sometimes be really intimidating for these little ones.
Yes.
So they need help on those Old Testament books, but you need to make sure that you balance that so you can hit everybody. One year I had a little girl that did all 3 of her books in 1 year, and she was just so driven. She was a 2nd grader,
Okay.
and she wanted to get them all
Sure.
done. So we took extra care in making sure that we worked with her before club, if she got there early, or
okay.
worked with her up until the moment her parents had to take her home.
Right, so she wasn't monopolizing the
Exactly.
entire time.
You kind of spread it out,
Okay.
and even sometimes during game time, she would rather do verses. You just have to find that balance so that the kids are still having fun, even though she found saying verses very fun, but they have to play games too.
So there's everything from setting limits on the number of sections they can do to finding alternate times to do some of these things.
Exactly.
Again, it all depends on the needs, I guess, of the child, what you have as far as leader resources available in your club, and then looking for creative
Right.
ways, I think, sometimes to get that balance.
Sure, you can have a child come in into the Awana year somewhere in the 2nd, 3rd month, and so you got to be flexible and allow them to be able to finish their
Catch
books.
up, right.
Exactly.
I think one thing that's important is to remind the kids that you value their time, and that each clubber is important. And if you limit their time or say, okay, why don't I work with somebody else, that you explain to the kids. It's not that I don't want to listen to you. It's that we have a lot of clubbers and they're important too, and I need to listen to them. And if we have extra time, I'll come back to you.
Exactly.
That way, they're not feeling like, oh, I did all this work and she doesn't care. It's that they know there is a time limit and that there are other kids there, and that we're more than happy to come back to them if there's time available.
Okay. Now, on the subject of Sparkies who have various capacities as far as memorizing verses, they also are at that age where they are varying in their ability to read. You have the kindergartners who basically don't read yet, and the 2nd graders who are beginning to get proficient at reading. They can sound words, may not understand what they mean, and then you got everyone in between. How do you work with those Sparkies who don't read yet? Terry?
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, because we had such a case last year. I had one of my boys where did not read or read well, but as an alternative, his mother had the verses and some of the other things, the songs, whatnot, recorded on DVD.
Okay, verses set to music.
So he could learn them that way, and it worked out real well. In fact, in some ways, he was even better prepared than the other boys, because he could kind of sing through the song a little
Right.
bit and add a little enthusiasm. But it was really neat to see him rhythmically going through these verses. And there were some boys that really stutter and struggle through a verse. But it worked real well for him. To have something pre-recorded for him to use really helped out.
Okay, great. Kim, how about you, working with those children that are pre-readers?
I try to get help from the other clubbers.
Okay.
Some of the clubbers that know how to read, I'll try to pair them up with the ones that don't. And that way,
Okay.
the clubbers are helping each other, and they can try to work together and just
Right.
have that bonding time.
Okay.
I also try to get another LIT to come in and help me. That way, when I'm working on listening to other people's sections, they can work with the clubber who can't read, and that way they can go over that and help them.
They can spend more time with that one clubber,
Right.
which frees you to deal
Exactly,
with
yeah.
the ones who are ready
Yeah.
to go.
And like I said before, the activity sheets work really well. I'll try to get activity sheets that have to do with the verse they're learning, and that way they can color the picture, and they can associate the picture to the verse that they're learning, and they can just remember it better.
Okay.
And I think the biggest help that I have is just the fun little games that we've done that help the clubbers remember. I try to find out what they're doing and how they interact with each other, and then use that to form a game or some type of activity where they can come together and memorize the verses, and that seems to
All
help.
right. So if
a
you
lot
can make
better.
it fun instead of being a chore,
Right.
you're that much further ahead.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
great. Lenine, how about you?
Well, I like to use some motions and
Okay.
do some movement.
Another way of learning.
Exactly, to get them to jog their memory so they can remember what a verse is. So something like, and that he was buried and he rose again
Okay,
the 3rd day according
sure.
to the scriptures.
Right.
That way I'm not actually giving them hints in words, but by doing the motions, that'll jog their memory. And then also, when I first read the verse to them, instead of just reading the words, because so many times they just see it as words,
Right.
you read it like a story, like it's really happened. So
Okay.
with inflection, so something like, John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." And then that gets them a little excited
okay.
that what they're
Right.
saying really means something, and it's really happened. So
Okay.
That's good.
they really
That's
light
good.
up when
Yeah.
you do something like that. Also, things like getting the older Sparks to help the younger ones. They just love being able to be like, "Oh, I've been there, done that. I'm helping this little kid now." And even though they're only a couple years apart, they really
Right.
enjoy helping
Sure.
each other. And then also getting extra help. You can enlist other people in your church that don't want to commit to being a leader, but just want to be a listener or a floater or just there for certain evenings to listen to verses. That's such a humongous help.
Okay.
I think one thing to add to that is some of the kids, if they're in a classroom where most other people know how to read and they don't, they can kind of feel intimidated and they don't want to share that. They keep it to themselves and they'll look at the book like they're reading and they'll just kind of like, "Oh yeah, I get that," but they really aren't reading it. And so, just kind of fun ways to get them to help them learn their verse without announcing that they don't read. Like
Okay.
I have one Spark that can't really read, and he's not very proud of that fact because other people can read, and
Right.
he's kind of shy about it. So I'll sit him in a circle, and I'll have them each go one by one, and then he'll say a part that he knows, and then if he's stuck, I'll go to the next person, and that way they say the next section, and he'll come back to that one, back to him, and that way it's interactive, and they get the idea of what they need to learn.
Okay, and it
But-
helps them to learn what comes
Right,
next. kind
but
of
they're
thing.
not so intimidated that they're afraid to learn.
So to be a successful Sparks Handbook Time leader, all you have to be is be a great disciplinarian, a relationship expert, and a time management expert. Is that what I'm hearing? Simple
much. Yeah.
piece of cake?
I think there's one
okay.
element you want to include there too. It's called planning and being
Oh, yeah,
prepared.
sure.
Absolutely, I think because if you don't have a plan going in, you could have a lot of dead time on your hands, and then kids wandering around wanting to do something to pass the time, and then you've got to enforce the discipline. So if you have a plan each week, it really helps out to balance that time, and also too having the right ratio of children to leaders. I think that really helps out too, so that you don't have any one person being overburdened, and then while they're still trying to get their boys through or girls through their verses, the other ones are sitting idle. So I think ratio, proportion, I think is very key as well.
Sure, okay. Great ideas, and I think lots of good food for thought for those who are watching this DVD. That again, it depends on the needs of your particular club, whether you have a lot of kids, few leaders, however it works. But there are creative ways to be able to attack handbook time in order to make it the most effective that you possibly can. So next up, we're going to be talking about building relationships, because those relationships, both with the leaders and kids and leaders to directors and leaders to parents, are going to be a key to the effectiveness of your ministry. So we're going to talk about that next. Don't go away.